these conversations are not going to always go exactly as you planned. It's not easy. And so I think sometimes when things do kind of go sideways and people start saying things that are somewhat triggering to us, I think we have to take out the emotional, somehow get very focused on the fact that they are not saying this to you as a personal attack. I think sometimes we take things very personally. And I get that. I get why. But most people are not attacking you personally. They're just telling you what they think. And so I think, one little trick that I often use is I pretend that I'm like a reporter or an anthropologist. And I'm just like, tell me why. I just go back to these why questions, or how, or what made you think that? Asking sort of those basic questions helps to sort of, one, diffuse the situation, but also, at the end of it, that's what we're trying to do, is dig into literally, why do you think that? But you have to think of yourself as sort of this intrepid explorer or journalist. And that's what helps me, is to take the emotion out of it and to just sort of think of myself in that way. I think when a conversation starts going in a direction that feels like you're moving into terrain where you really vehemently disagree. Let me give you an example. There was this man who said that he thought Japanese internment wasn't so bad because, people were housed and fed and nobody got killed in those Japanese internment camps. And, I had to, most of the time I'm like, why? Why would you think that? My judgment call on that was, nope, Japanese internment camps are pretty bad and there's really no justification for that. And I said that. And I think it's really important to remember that, yes, you absolutely should ask why, try to understand, where the person's mind is, again, what their experiences are that led them to believe this. But there are points when you kind of have to just say, dude, that's pretty wrong and there's really no reason to believe that. So we need to correct that. I said it in a not very kind way. I think there's a kinder way to do that, but it's really hard. So, I think that we should not shy away from those kind of confrontations, but we should let those confrontations be very minimal and be able to say what we believe, but also be able to step away from that, because we can't let those kinds of confrontations stop the conversations altogether, because there are other things that we're going to be able to have conversations about that we can come to some sliver of agreement about. And I think that we sometimes think that we need to come to some agreement at the end, and that would be ideal, but maybe there is never any agreement at the end. I strive to find some sliver of agreement, but even if I can't, I feel that the fact that we came together and had that conversation at all is a victory unto itself. In our society, I think because we're always trying to persuade the other person of our opinion, we think that it's a failure when we can't change somebody's mind. No, the victory is that we actually started the conversation in the first place. I've been doing these conversations for 3 years. One of the shortcomings of these conversations for me is that basically it's a different set of people every single time. So every time I'm engaged in these conversations, it's always the first time. And I think that if we want to see real change, we have to have these conversations with the same people over and over. It's going to take a year's worth of weekly conversations in order to see real change. So I am realistic about the fact that having one conversation with one person is not going to change everything. We have to find a way, and we have to have the will to continue having those conversations over and over. And so actually that is sort of the next iteration of this project, is figuring out a way to have these conversations over and over, but at a much larger scale. And it's sort of like scaling up while also scaling down. I want to have very intimate conversations, but having a lot of those intimate conversations. And how do you motivate a lot of people to have those conversations over and over again? I've always had a lifelong interest in politics. I've always, obsessively read the news, always following along with what's happening in government. But like many Americans, I actually did not become super engaged with organizing and the actual process until the 2016 election. That was a big wake-up call for me. And so it made me realize that every one of us has to take action in some way, however small it is. And so that is one of the biggest ways in which I have changed through this process, is seeing just how critically important it is for every single one of us to take some action, even if it just means voting. And that seems like such a basic thing, but given that half Americans don't vote, that's kind of a big thing to even do, is to get out there and vote. But I think on a very personal level, the way this whole organizing process has changed me over the last 3 years is that, so my family, my immediate family, are very conservative. They all voted for Trump. And so over the last few years, our relationship, I feel like, has actually deteriorated because I have not given them much leeway to be conservative. And, and they do the same to me. They're always calling me like bleeding heart liberal, and stuff like that. And so within my own family, we have become more and more distant from each other. And I think a lot of that is it's not so much because of politics, but because politics has sort of become part of our values, or it has become part of our identity. And so I remember one time my mom said recently to me that she said, well, you just think you're so much smarter than I am because you went to, a university and went to law school. You think you're so much smarter than I am. And that actually was a pivotal moment for me to think about how she, in a way, represents a lot of how conservative America thinks of people like me, liberal America. You think you're so much smarter. You're so condescending. And that was a real gut punch to me to realize, oh my gosh, I do think I'm smarter than the rest of Americans, or, conservative Americans. I did think that. And that was a real gut punch for me to realize I'm not, and to have more humility around how I viewed others. And being able to travel around the country and ask people questions face to face and have real conversations face to face has 100% changed how I see our country. And I actually feel more hopeful about our country when I'm traveling around having these conversations and seeing sort of the amazing complexity and beauty of how different we are. And when I come back to my liberal solid blue bubble, I actually feel a little less hopeful, because I feel that when we're not having these kind of conversations, we are closing ourselves off to what's really possible, and we're making ourselves more arrogant, and that does not help anybody.